The Boy Scouts is something that a lot of young boys love to do. It's so much fun to be able to go out there and earn badges, whether it be from camping, making knots, or anything in between. But it seems not everything is good memories and smooth sailing. These Boy Scouts sent in their pretty creepy experiences while they were out on their trips. If you guys have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it's a Boy Scout story or something completely different, submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Now, let's get into these creepy Boy Scout stories. So, I was a staff member at a Boy Scout camp in eastern Oklahoma. I was asleep in my cabin with my friends when there was a knock on the door. As it turned out, a kid was missing, and for some reason, I didn't get up at the time. I was still half asleep when I woke up and looked at the group chat. I got up and left about 20 minutes after everyone else. I then went walking down the road. I stopped for a moment and quickly realized there was no sound. There was only silence hanging in the air on this night. There were no bugs, there were no birds, bats, nothing. I soon turned around, and in the trees, what I saw will always haunt me. What I saw stood on two legs and looked to be about 9 feet tall if I had to guess. The thing's face looked like a deer, and it let out a horrifying sound that made me freeze in my tracks and crouch low. The monster soon crouched down and looked me eye to eye. Its pair, black eyes were so close that I could see my reflection in its cold, black eyes, and I swore to God that it spoke to me. It didn't speak using its mouth either. However, it spoke inside my mind, telling me to leave and don't look back, or it would kill me. I reacted how any sane person would react. I turned and ran away as fast as I could. As I ran, I was afraid the thing would be stalking me, which only spurred me more. By the time I got back to the cabins, one of my friends told me they had found the kid. Apparently the kid was found in another campsite. The next morning, I told my friend about what happened. He then informed me that I wasn't the only person who had had this experience in the camp. As it turns out, this land is on Native American territory, and because of this, I believe the thing I saw may have been a skinwalker. But I want to know what you guys think. So down in the comments below, let me know what you think this creature could have been. During the weekends, I work at a Boy Scout camp, the name of which I will not disclose. We take kids out camping in the northern US. Anyway, I had younger kids that don't sleep outside, so we eat dinner inside after being outside all day. Then we go back outside after a dinner for a night hike, campfire, etc. So after dinner, I decide as my scouts are getting ready to go outside again that I'd sneak off for a cigarette. My normal smoking spot is too close to where the kids are running around outside, so I decide to jog down a trail to ensure I wasn't spotted. I jog down the dark trail without a flashlight. I've practically lived here for a decade over my time, so it's not a big deal. I know where the trails are. I didn't want anybody to notice me sneaking off, because we're not supposed to smoke if you haven't picked that up. I get about 150 feet or so into the trail and stop, because I figured I'd see how far away I was, and if I was far away enough to smoke, I would. Before I get the chance to turn around, I feel and hear a man breathe right in my left ear. At first, I think it's my jacket rubbing, so I move around quickly, but it was not that at all. I promptly turn around and say, "Screw my cigarette," and walk back inside. As it turns out, many people over the years, myself included, have experienced paranormal activity in this massive camp. Some of the types of activity included will-o-wisps, voices, phantom footsteps, doors opening and closing on their own, deaths, and stories of other deaths, staff summoning evil things there, and oh so much more. So yeah, there's all kind of types of activity out there, and I would be careful if you ever end up in that camp. So I've been a Boy Scout for 6 years. I recently got my Eagle Scout, but there was one event I will never forget. I live in California, and we have an overnight ahead of us, a Hornet CV-12 aircraft carrier, which was the second, as the first was sunk by Japan in the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. Both befell bad luck as the new Hornet saw little action, but lost many men. The most notable action was when the deck, which was held up by struts, but was hit by a tidal wave and collapsed, killing over 300 men among many other incidents. As such, you can imagine there have been many ghost sightings around this carrier. Things like faceless men on watch or people just walking through walls weren't uncommon. My encounter was almost stereotypical. We were at the bow, listening to ghost stories, and keep in mind, they were still working on the ship. Anyway, I look up and it was almost pitch black except for a big emergency light, and from one of the catwalks up above, which people cannot access anymore, I felt every hair on my body rise up and get goosebumps. Why, you may ask? Well, I swear I saw a shadow slowly walk across and go through the wall. I knew it was no threat to me, but something about seeing something you don't see every day like that really freaked me out in that moment. I'm sure part of it was the history and atmosphere that got to me as well, but seeing such a thing happen before my eyes is truly something. There's so much we don't understand about the world we live in, life after death, the unexplainable, etc. That is my story, and I'm sorry that it was short. I may have more to share in the future, and thank you Swamp Dweller for sharing my story and allowing me to have a platform. I honestly can't believe I had forgotten about this. This happened back in the fall of either 2002 or 2003, when I was around 12 or 13 years old near Clinton Lake in Kansas on a Boy Scout campout. I still go backpacking and camping a lot, but this was the last camping trip I remember attending before moving states. We arrived at our campsite on a Friday, and planned on staying through Saturday and leaving Sunday morning. I remember us having to set our tents up in the rain on Friday evening, but Saturday was sunny and gorgeous. I don't remember every precise detail, but right about before we went out for a hike that morning, an old van, perhaps a late 70s model, pulled into a campsite within view of ours. These guys were hippies, with a capital H, and that was my first exposure to what weed smells like. It was new to me, and some of the others were confused. We thought it was a skunk. The hippies were too far away for any of us to hear any specific conversations, but even the adult leaders found this to be a funny sight. One of the leaders I think went over to ask what they were doing and if they could stop using drugs in front of us or move campsites. When we got back from our day hike, those hippies were still at the same campsite, and they were super baked. They couldn't play their instruments with any skill, and it was pretty funny to see. But here's where things got weird. By the time the sun was setting, the group of stoners had completely ditched their hippie attire and dressed in a total goth style. Some had makeup that made their faces unnaturally pale, while others had black trench coats on. They must have had a stereo because all we could hear over there was grunge music playing. That night, after we cooked and ate dinner, all the scouts, including myself, headed out into an open area of the campgrounds to play Capture the Flag. We collectively established the boundaries, which were still pretty close to the group of now goths. But it gave us a different angle of their campsite. I doubt they had any idea we were there since we played no flashlights. By this point, the grunge metal had been replaced by this creepy, ominous opera music. I succumbed to curiosity, but I wasn't about to sneak into their campsite. I just crept a little closer to see what they were doing. They had made a large campfire beyond legal limits, and I couldn't see any of the group. On a tree, I saw something that had initially freaked me out, but I figured they were still feeling the weed and any of the other drugs they may have taken. For this to be too real, and continue to play. I think we only played one game, and then retired to our tents. At some point in the middle of the night, all of our adult leaders woke us up and told us to quietly and quickly pack up our things, take down our tents, and get back to the bus. As we were packing everything up, we couldn't help but notice the bonfire was still going strong, but the music had stopped and we heard people talking. The tone didn't sound like casual conversation, no, but I couldn't hear any specific words. I don't know how to describe it. Once everyone and everything was on the bus, the driver got us the hell out of there. The adults were abnormally quiet, and the scouts had congregated to the back of the bus. I don't remember if they told us anything about it. I don't remember if one of us told the adults about those guys, but we knew it had to have been something regarding that strange group. A fellow scout from the other CTF team had also tried sneaking into their campsite and saw the same thing I did. Ever since, I'm inclined to think that what we saw was real, and a reason for us cutting the trip short. Hanging from the tree, he and I both saw a decapitated dog and 2 severed human legs. I never learned anything more about that night, but I definitely will continue to do research to see if I can't find any old newspaper clippings about it. My first experience with a skinwalker happened when I was 16 years old. I was in the Boy Scouts, and I was on a camping trip with some guys from my troop. We were deep in the woods, about an hour hike from the nearest trail entrance, and then about an hour hike from the nearest hiking trail. We didn't have a scoutmaster with us on this camping trip, so we were all on our own, but we were armed. We all had a hunting rifle as well as a handgun. There were 5 of us. On the first night we heard distant, muffled screams, but we never thought much of it, saying maybe it was an animal in heat. The rest of the night was rather uneventful. We just talked some crap and ate dinner before going to bed. On the second day, we all got up and hiked to a pond to fish. On the way there, however, things didn't feel right. It was dead silent. Usually, you'd hear some birds singing as well as the wind rustling in leaves in the trees. Strangely, there was nothing. After a while, we reached the pond and started fishing. After about an hour, we realized something. There were fish in the pond, but they were all dead. So we decided to go back to the camp and hunt for our dinner. When we got back to camp though, we found something utterly disturbing. There was a mutilated deer that had been left out about 10 yards from our tents. After we found the deer, we had heard that same exact scream again. This time though, it was much closer. We had decided to stay at the camp that night, keeping our guns trained in various directions. I don't think any of us got much sleep that night at all. At about 2 in the morning, we started hearing footsteps all around the camp. Then, we started hearing a strange laugh that kept going on for about 30 minutes. That's when I saw it. About 50 feet away from me, there was an approximately 6, maybe even 7 foot tall creature walking on its 2 legs with its back hunched over. It wasn't much later that it looked at me. In the dim light, I could see its face. It had no eyes, and the way it moved was extremely unnatural. It would twitch around instead of simply walk. After a while, it twitched back into the tree line. When morning came, I told everyone what I saw, and we decided it was time to leave. Fortunately for us, the hike back to the car was fairly uneventful. That was until we got to the car. When we got to the car, we saw that the deer's head was left on the hood of the car. Needless to say, we never went back there, and I never will. "7 years ago, I was camping near my local town here in Mexico. I was part of a brigade of Boy Scouts, and I remember that one of our leaders invited us to explore the forest. We decided the first thing we'd do when we arrived was look for wood. After 30 minutes of looking for some wood, the leader gave us an alert that in front of us was an old man that was doing something strange. This was made stranger because people weren't able to enter the forest after 8 p.m., so we were really confused about his presence. We were only there ourselves because the leader reserved a place to give us a special badge. The badges are kind of different here in Mexico, so this one was about exploration, using camping material and teamwork. Anyway, after staring at the old man, he put himself into a crouch position. 5 minutes later, the old man disappeared, and the only thing that was in front of us was a big dog with blue eyes. This spooked us quite a bit. How did he shapeshift? Or did he shapeshift? Or what happened? We immediately started running back to the camp to tell the other kids what we had just witnessed. The oldest member of our brigade told us the story of Nahuals. It's a Mexican legend that states that special persons can transform into certain animals with a specific purpose. Others say that they are lost spirits trying to search for peace in the afterlife. That night, the leaders decided to move the tents to a little bunker up the hill. That night, all the kids were paranoid about the event they'd witnessed, so they decided that we were going to be safer in a little bunker. After that experience, the brigade decided that the exploration badge was going to be canceled for some time, which was no fun for some of the newer people, but I guess I can understand if there's a shape-shifting beast out there. This summer I had several encounters with what I call mysterious creatures. Some of these encounters were really terrifying to me. This past summer I worked at a Boy Scout camp, and there have been rumors of spirits that patrolled the nature trail on the far side of camp. One night after work, me and two co-workers, Steve and Jim, decided to walk down a trail at midnight. We were about halfway through the trail when Jim told us to stop, and we listened. It sounded like something was gnawing on bones and tearing flesh. We shone our flashlights to see what remains of a deer, but the rib cage was torn open and almost flattened. The deer's entrails were scattered across the forest floor, and the skull was crushed, and we could still hear the noises. Steve told us that we should get the heck out of here, but we pressed on deeper into the forest. Suddenly, Jim stopped in front of us, and I asked him what was up. He just pointed forward. About 20 yards away, we saw what I can only describe as a thing. It was crouched, with its back behind us, tearing into what we believe was a piece of the deer. It stopped and slowly rose, standing almost 10 feet, and it dropped whatever it was eating as it turned around. Its face was nothing but a skull, but not a human skull. It looked like a deer's. Its arms were long and lanky, ending in large claws. Jim screamed, "Oh my God!" as we began to run. The creature let out this horrifying screech, and I made the mistake of turning around. The beast went on all fours and charged at us, breaking smaller trees and stumps as it ran at us. We continued to run as fast as we could until we got off the trail and stopped as we got to the pool building. As we collected ourselves again, I could hear something outside. When I looked outside, This creature was standing under a light post, breathing slowly. It destroyed the light above it with one swipe. It used its long claws before disappearing back into the darkness. The next encounter was a couple of days later. It was me and 2 other lifeguards, Colin and Maya. We were sitting in the office as a thunderstorm ravaged the camp. We watched the rain when a flashlight showed us something standing on the other side of the pool fence. Maya shrieked as the beast disappeared, where it looked like it would have been walking towards the lake. I followed the beast and lost it in the pouring rain. The next morning, we found what we could only guess were geese that were torn to shreds. It took us about an hour to clean up the pieces. The next encounter was the next to last week of the camp, and this was honestly the most terrifying experience. It was a Wednesday night, and I had traveled to the nature trail alone, and then I heard it. Something was laughing at me, and it sounded like it was close to me. I turned and saw the biggest creature I have ever seen in my life. It stood easily 10 feet or more, and had a deer skull for a head, with massive bloody antlers. It looked like a scene out of a horror movie. It began to chase me as I ran the trail. I could hear the brush behind me being crushed, and the beast was breathing heavily. It felt like hours, but it was only a few minutes until I figured I'd lost it. After I stopped to catch my breath, I could feel my backpack being torn. When I turned, I saw the creature. I then locked myself in the pool office. I was terrified when I heard it ram the door. When it stopped, I could hear someone's voice. Through the crack, I could see it sulk around the building. I never saw it again that night. The final encounter was the last week, when each night I saw the creature lumbering through the parking lot. It looked like it had something in its grasp as it tore into it. I ran back to my campsite, and as I laid in my sleeping bag, I heard footsteps trudging through the campsite. When I looked up, I saw its bloody covered snout poking its head through the tent flaps. Its red eyes cast an eerie glow inside the tent, and I could hear it breathe, and what I thought was laughter. Each night it returned and stuck its head into various tents until one staff member woke up and screamed. The next day we couldn't find him, and spent the day looking for him until we found him in the parking lot. He looked pale, and told us that I grabbed him and took him to the old BB range and left him there. He ran as fast as he could to the parking lot after that. That night, me and 3 other people took flashlights and went to explore the range. It was decrepit with vines growing all over it. Then we saw them. Several carcasses of deer strewn about in various stages of decay. They appeared to be partially consumed, and all of them was missing their head. One guard screamed as the Wendigo rose from behind the rock wall in front of the range and charged at us. We ran back to the science building, and we watched it as it came out into the light. This one had blue eyes and was extremely thin and had 3 long fingers, ending in claws. It scraped the ground and sniffed the air and slowly returned to the forest. That was the final encounter I had with it. I thought about returning to find it again, but I haven't yet. I quit that job and I don't know if I'll ever go back. Thanks for listening to these creepy Boy Scout stories. Some of these encounters were definitely mind-boggling and had me a little bit scared sometimes. Let me know if they did the same to you in the comments down below. If you have a story that you would like to share, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button, as it helps me out more than you could ever know. If you're new to the swamp, why not subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, since I upload them almost every single day, on all things natural and supernatural. You can also download Swamp Dweller Scary Stories on iTunes, Spotify, and pretty much everywhere else you listen to podcasts, so be sure to do that if you're on the go. Definitely helps pass the time. And plus, we could always use more spooks in our day. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.